Breaking tonight, Canada wins a politically charged showdown against the U.S. The hockey face-off with national pride on the line. And the anthem change that made a statement.
We are unfortunately canceling all Sunwing outbound flights.
Anger and frustration after Sunwing cancels flights for the second day in a row.
Oh my God, I just wanted to cry.
I'm just frustrated, obviously.
Cascading delays after that stunning crash at Toronto Pearson. And the White House demands Ukraine strike a deal, handing over its critical minerals as the two presidents trade insults.
Let's tone down the rhetoric, sign the deal.
Where does it leave the war and NATO allies? At issue is here.
From CBC News, this is The National with Chief Correspondent Adrian Arsenault.
Thanks for joining us. Well, there is elation across this country tonight as Canada defeated the U.S. in the Four Nations Face-Off final. And this triumph in Boston was about so much more than just an age-old hockey rivalry. Canada closed the deal and in a grueling overtime game delivered on an on-ice rebuke to an off-ice threat. Earlier today, Donald Trump used the finals to again menace Canada's independence, promising to make it the 51st state. But the U.S. failed to conquer Canada here tonight. For some, a vindication, giving a dangerous bully a black eye. Thomas Daigle joins us from Boston's TD Garden. So, Thomas, this game felt huge in more ways than one. Can you give us a sense of what happened?
Yeah, there were a lot of Canadians here at TD Garden, Adrian, and everyone was on their feet, just erupting when Connor McDavid scored that overtime goal. You know, there are goals in our lifetime that you think back and remember as hockey fans. Sidney Crosby's 2010 golden goal at the Olympics in Vancouver. This is Connor McDavid's golden goal. McDavid, of course, the Edmonton Oilers superstar, making a name for himself tonight. The big star tonight for Team Canada. Many call him the greatest hockey player in the world, and he was the best player in that overtime period. Just an extraordinary moment when the players were all handed their medals. Oh, Canada played. Listen. Now, clearly, there was no one booing that time, but Oh Canada became something of a central talking point in this game, with Chantal Kreviazuk singing the Canadian national anthem before the puck drop, changing the lyrics pointedly from "In All of Us Command" to "That Only Us Command," one of the elements showing how politically charged this all was, Adrian.
So, Thomas, Donald Trump made this not just about hockey, but sovereignty, and I gather we're already seeing some reaction to that.
Yeah, after the win, Justin Trudeau put out on social media this message: "You can't take our country and you can't take our game." That caps off a day of tension between Trudeau and Trump on social media, with Trump inviting Trudeau, calling him a governor, to a meeting in Washington, D.C. with other U.S. governors to watch the game. Trump repeating his threat to annex Canada, and his press secretary repeating from the White House today that the U.S. would beat Canada, a country that would become the 51st state of the Union. Of course, that didn't happen. Canada is still an independent country, and tonight, our champions. Adrian.
Okay, enjoy the night. Thomas Daigle in Boston. So it's been a wild, definitely nail-biting night. For the millions of Canadians from coast to coast who hoped and prayed for this victory, we have reporters in Vancouver and in Cole Harbour, Nova Scotia, to tell us how that winning goal went over. So why don't we start with Michelle Gassoub, who's at a sports bar in downtown Vancouver. Michelle, such a close game, right down to the end. Tell us about that big, loud, lovely room.
Adrian, when that puck went in the net, this room roared. It just absolutely roared. People were on their feet. They were on their tables, they were on their chairs, they were hugging their friends, lifting their friends up in the air, hugging people I don't think they'd ever met before. I have never felt the blood pressure of a room all come down so quickly and so simultaneously. Adrian, I think this is the game that people wanted, and this is the game that they got, and they made us work for it. I mean, people were extremely stressed going into overtime, but there is some symmetry to that Vancouver 2010 Olympic gold medal game of Canada taking the win in overtime. People were cheering Crosby's name, cheering McDavid's name when they sang the national anthem in this bar, and people sang the line, "True North, strong and free." They held on the free and yelled out the word free. So I think a lot of elated and satisfied Canadian hockey fans tonight, though I think it might take a while for the blood pressure to fully come down. Adrian.
Yeah, it sounds like this country needed that. All right, Michelle, thanks very much. So now let's go to Kayla Hounsell in Nova Scotia. So Kayla, you're in Cole Harbour, where two of tonight's Team Canada stars honed their hockey skills. Has to be a lot of emotion where you are.
Well, there was certainly a lot of emotion when that final goal was scored, Adrian. It's pretty late here, so this bar emptied out pretty quickly. But as I say, so much emotion here in Cole Harbour, as there is across the country, to be sure. But there is something special happening here in the Halifax area tonight with three hometown players on the ice together. As you say, Cole Harbour is home to Sidney Crosby and Nathan MacKinnon. Just down the road in Hammonds Plains, home of Brad Marchand. So when McDavid scored that final goal, this place just lost it. As we heard from Michelle, there were people hugging and screaming, crying, jumping up and down. I can't say it any better than this. Have a listen.
You know, again, you look at passing the torch, Crosby, MacKinnon. McKinnon's now the young gun from Cole Harbour. Crosby on the back end. Obviously, you may see him one more time, but it's going to be MacKinnon and McDavid going forward. I'm looking forward to that. So, yeah, obviously the Cole Harbour boys showed up.
Now, Crosby and MacKinnon grew up playing at a rink that is just a stone's throw from this bar. So for some people here tonight, this is still surreal to watch them grow up, then to watch them play tonight together on this international stage and win. And so while people here were certainly saying they're so proud of their country tonight, they're especially proud of the boys from Cole Harbour, Adrian.
Yeah, no kidding. Sounds like a great night, Kayla. That's Kayla Hounsell in Cole Harbour. So turning to other news now, Sunwing passengers are outraged after the airline canceled multiple flights shortly before takeoff. As Nicole Williams shows us, snow and Monday's crash landing at Toronto Pearson are still causing chaos.
I have an announcement from the airline.
Just 3 hours before boarding, hopeful passengers at Pearson Airport, ready to check in their bags, are given some crushing news.
Due to extenuating circumstances, we are unfortunately canceling all Sunwing outbound flights.
13 flights at Pearson alone Wednesday and more on Thursday.
We're just not going to get there. We're not going to get a room.
This passenger en route from Halifax to the Dominican Republic for his sister's wedding. He says Sunwing not only canceled his flight, but his hotel stay too.
It's my sister. If I could go there and sleep in the pool, I would. Yeah. I can't even make it.
Sunwing announcing it needed to prioritize getting stranded passengers abroad home. Air Canada and WestJet also playing catch-up.
My husband and I were set to leave from our holiday in Cancun on Monday night. I know that so many people were probably displaced and stranded.
There is mounting frustration in the wake of the crash of Delta Flight 4819, which shut down two of Pearson's busiest runways in the process.
It highlights just how dependent aviation in Canada is on Pearson Airport.
Airlines already playing catch-up to a ballooning backlog because of severe snowstorms in eastern Canada.
I just wanted to cry, and we were just like everybody looking at each other. What are we going to do? 45 people here. What are we doing with the babies and everything?
The wreckage of the Delta flight was cleared away Wednesday night, taken to a hangar for further investigation. Delta says all 21 people injured in the crash have since been released from hospital. As a gesture of goodwill, it's also offering everyone that was on board $30,000 US, no strings attached. Nicole Williams, CBC News, Mississauga, Ontario.
In a surprise announcement, P.E.I. Premier Dennis King resigned today.
To be clear, my health is fine. I'm doing very well. And while I know this might be shocking news to some today, or at least some people, as I told them, they have told me it's shocking, I do feel that I have repeatedly said time and again that I wouldn't be a lifer in this job.
The premier got emotional, saying the job took a toll on his family. He says he does not intend to ever seek elected office again. Dennis King is also immediately stepping down as PC party leader and as an MLA. PEI's current education minister, Rob Lance, will be sworn in as premier tomorrow. Well, tensions between the United States and Ukraine remain high tonight after a day of meetings in Kyiv and admonishments from the White House. Paul Hunter with how it all played out.
With relations between the two countries lately cratering, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy and a face-to-face with the U.S. President Donald Trump's envoy to the war in Ukraine, Keith Kellogg. Zelenskyy saying afterward, remarkably, our talks restore hope, but he gave few other details. As Russia's war on Ukraine rages on, the U.S., Ukraine's most powerful supporter in the fighting, has been strongly suggesting it wants payback for the many billions it's given Ukraine in wartime aid. Specifically, that Zelenskyy allow the U.S. access to Ukraine's critical minerals, something Ukraine has resisted. Meanwhile, with Trump suggesting Ukraine started the war, calling Zelenskyy a dictator, Zelenskyy suggesting Trump has fallen for Russian disinformation.
Insults to President Trump were unacceptable.
Trump's national security advisor also restating the new U.S. demand for Ukraine's minerals. And to those who say Trump is being played by Russian President Vladimir Putin,
I, for one, and I think all Americans and around the world should have no doubt about his ability to not only handle Putin, but to handle the complexity of driving this war to an end.
On that, with Russia making more gains in the fighting, says one former Russian diplomat turned Putin critic, that Trump has publicly stated he wants the war ended quickly falls right into Russian hands.
That again puts him in a very weak and vulnerable position because he thus makes himself dependent on the goodwill from Moscow, and Moscow can exploit it.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau spoke with Zelenskyy by phone, underlining Canada will always stand in defense of Ukraine and that Ukraine must be at the table for any talks on ending the war. Paul Hunter, CBC News, Washington.
The U.S. Senate has narrowly confirmed Kash Patel as the new director of the FBI.
The yeas are 51, the nays are 49. The confirmation is confirmed.
Patel is a harsh critic of the FBI and a fierce Trump loyalist, who Democrats worry will now go after the president's adversaries in the agency. Patel has denied that. Well, a string of explosions has blown apart 3 buses in Bat Yam. That's a city near Tel Aviv. And officials say it's a miracle no one was hurt. The buses exploded after they were left parked and empty at the end of their routes. At least 4 other explosive devices have been found during a sweep of other buses. No group has claimed responsibility, but Israel's defense minister has ordered ongoing operations in the West Bank ramped up in response. Over the past month, Israeli troops have killed dozens in the occupied West Bank and displaced tens of thousands. And those explosions came on the heels of the expected return of 4 Israeli hostages from Gaza, all of them dead. But as Sasha Petrusik explains, Israel accuses Hamas of a horrifying deception.
Under cold rain, a macabre ceremony. 2 black coffins bearing the bodies of 2 young boys. But there was another casket, which Hamas claimed held the body of the boy's mother, Shiri Bibas. Now Israel says that's not her. And it's not the only point of dispute. about their deaths in captivity. The family was killed in an Israeli airstrike, says a Hamas militant. Israel says the two boys were brutally murdered. Israelis lined the road in silence.
Today is a day of mourn in Israel.
A day they lost hope that the youngest hostages just might have survived. 4-year-old Ariel Bibas and his 9-month-old brother, Kafir, held with their mother, Shiri. Their father, Yarden, was released alive 3 weeks ago, unsure of his family's fate. Now no one in Israel seems sure where Shiri is, and that's just adding to the pain and confusion. Shiri and her boys were among the best known of the hostages, even beyond Israel. The last glimpse of them was CCTV footage from Gaza.
No one will ever be able to forget the horror in her eyes, the look in her eyes, holding her two babies and just going for the unknown with... You can't really grasp it.
In Gaza, Ali Barakat says the death of any children makes him sad too. Many of their own dead here are still buried under rubble.
We cannot retrieve them, so we can bury them and rest them in peace.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israelis should be enraged. He vows to destroy Hamas and to bring the remaining hostages home. 6 are due to be released alive on Saturday, followed by 4 other dead hostages next week. But it'll take tough negotiations to extend the ceasefire and see dozens more hostages come home to a country in grief. Sasha Petrusik, CBC News, Jerusalem.
Canada is moving to list 7 transnational criminal organizations as terrorist groups, delivering on a promise made to U.S. President Donald Trump.
These listed entities are organized crime groups that spread fear in local populations by using methods of extreme violence and are known for drug trafficking, human trafficking, and trafficking in illegal guns.
And the Minister of Public Safety added that these groups play a leading role in the distribution of fentanyl in Canada. The new designation gives law enforcement additional powers to trace and disrupt the financing of these groups. Well, Canada's Heritage Minister has a pitch to change the CBC.
CBC does not belong to the Liberals. It does not belong to the Conservatives. It belongs to the Canadian people.
From a new funding model to getting rid of ads, we break down the proposal and the reaction. Plus, snowy, slippery sidewalks stranding some in central Canada.
It's incredibly frustrating because I now have to limit where I can go.
The calls for better cleanup. And later, an oh-so-stubborn moose makes itself at home on a woman's doorstep. We're back in 2. Spain's former top soccer official will not serve time for forcibly kissing a female player. The televised kiss got Luis Rubiales convicted of sexual assault, and prosecutors wanted to lock him up for 2.5 years, but today's sentence was limited to a fine and a smaller payment to Jennifer Hermosa of about $4,000 for what the judge called moral damage caused to her. Well, Canada's Heritage Minister is laying out her plan to modernize CBC Radio Canada. And as Ashley Burke explains, it includes adding to the current mandate.
This is the CBC television network.
CBC's been around for almost 90 years.
This is CBC.
Its role to inform, enlighten, and entertain Canadians. But as the U.S. threatens Canada's sovereignty, the government says it's time for more responsibility and more funding.
We need to envision the investments that we're making in our public broadcaster as a national security issue.
Canada pays $33 per person a year for its public broadcaster. The Heritage Minister wants that number closer to the G7 average, $62. Plus to drop subscription fees, make all news ad-free, and for CBC Radio Canada to take on a new role fighting disinformation at a time when social media companies have a powerful reach.
We need to be able to tell our own stories in our own way, And Radio-Canada, CBC will never be controlled by Musk, Zuckerberg, or any other private billionaire tech oligarch.
The minister points to the foreign interference inquiry that recently found disinformation is the single biggest threat to Canadian democracy.
Information manipulation is now eminently possible and quite dangerous to democracies. That really does need to be addressed, and I think sort of embedding it at the core of Canadian institutions makes a lot of sense.
But Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says it's time to defund the CBC while maintaining its French language programming.
Nobody watches CBC television. They have among the worst ratings of any network. And yet Trudeau gives them billions more. We're going to cut wasteful spending.
You cannot say you love Canada and yet pledge to destroy our public broadcaster that is central in telling the stories of our country.
The Liberals campaigned on a promise in 2021 to update CBC's mandate, but is coming out with a plan now when it's unlikely to be adopted. Parliament's prorogued, and there's expected to be an election sometime soon. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
As snow piles up in Ontario and Quebec, frustration is also growing.
There's no really where for it to go, so everyone just kind of shovels out their neighbor.
Why advocates are calling for better cleanup no matter the cost. After the break, Rosie's here with that issue. Well, hello, you.
Hey, Adrienne. Tonight, we're going to talk about Trump's comments about Ukraine and Canada's response.
It's a fundamental principle for Canada and for the vast majority of our allies that nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine.
How will tensions between President Trump and President Zelenskyy affect how Canada and other allies respond? Chantal, Althea, and Andrew join me to talk about that and a lot more.
Well, Albertans are getting some warmer weather after 2 weeks of record-breaking cold. That deep freeze started easing today. Temperatures rising from minus 21 to plus 6. By the weekend, it could even get as high as 10 degrees. Well, days after back-to-back storms slammed parts of Ontario and Quebec, people are still struggling to navigate snow-covered streets and sidewalks. And as Vanessa Lee tells us, it isn't just challenging, but costly for some.
Frustration is growing as Toronto struggles to recover from back-to-back storms. Days after the snowfall, the commute is challenging. There is still nowhere to park. The city says it's pivoted from snow clearing to snow removal. Not fast enough, say some.
There's no really where for it to go, so everyone just kind of shovels out their neighbor and tries to shovel out a spot, but it just keeps piling up. And especially here, it just blows in from the park.
So right now I am stuck.
Many sidewalks are impassable. Emily Chan is calling for better accessibility for people with disabilities.
It's incredibly frustrating because I now have to limit where I can go, who I can go see, and I've had to stay home a lot more, which is not ideal.
Here in Montreal, the city says it's taking longer than expected to clear the 75 centimeters of snow. As of this morning, they're only a quarter of the way there and are asking people to do their part and respect the signs.
Each time we're towing a car, we're losing 5 to 10 minutes. We're asking everyone to move their car at the appropriate time. We're asking everyone don't add any snow on the street.
It's so difficult to get around. Some senior centers have had to cancel vital services.
The isolation can be pretty difficult already as it is. For the Meals on Wheels clients, sometimes our delivery is the only time they see another human being all day.
In Ottawa, the pace of progress is getting costly for Callum Elliott. Even though he paid for an on-street parking pass, he has no choice but to use private lots.
On average, around $20 a day.
Patience put to the test as the cleanup continues. Vanessa Lee, CBC News, Montreal.
Now let's break down the week in politics. Rosie's here with that issue.
At issue tonight, support for Ukraine. Tensions between the United States and Ukraine grow as Donald Trump calls its democratically elected president a dictator, blaming the war on him. Prime Minister Trudeau spoke with Volodymyr Zelenskyy today, rejecting how the U.S. has handled peace talks.
It's a fundamental principle for Canada and for the vast majority of our allies that nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine.
So what do Trump's comments mean for peace in Ukraine and for the rules-based order supported by Canada and other allies? I'm Rosemary Barton, here to break it down tonight. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, Althea Raj. Good to see you all. There's also a meeting now planned in Kyiv on Monday with a number of world leaders, European leaders, and others who are going to be there to offer support for President Zelenskyy. Andrew, I'm going to start with you on this one. How troubling is this dynamic and this move by Trump to adopt even some of the same language as President Putin?
Well, every time we think we've got our minds around how bad it can get under Donald Trump, he goes further. I don't think that's accidental. He always exceeds expectations of how bad he's going to be. So I think prior to maybe a couple of weeks ago, people might have thought he was insufficiently supportive of Ukraine or overly eager to get a peace deal. I think it's very clear after the last couple of weeks that that's not the case. It's much worse than that. It's not just that he gave up too many concessions at the beginning of a process in which you would be negotiating things back and forth. It's not just that. It's that he's basically on the side of the Russians. I think that is by now a pretty well-established point of view. When you were talking about Ukraine having started the war, when you're talking about adopting the Putin line on you should have elections right now in the middle of a war zone with a fifth of your country under occupation, when you start talking about making demands on Ukraine that it pay, I think Mr. Trump put it, $500 billion in reparations, whatever you want to call it. That's the sort of thing you usually do against the aggressor after they've lost the war, not a fellow democracy fighting for its life. So couple that with the discussions at the Munich conference in Europe, where his Secretary of Defense, where his Vice President both made extraordinary remarks that basically told Europe it was on its own, not just Ukraine, but Europe was on its own effectively in any conflict with Russia. You can see why leaders across Europe are now scrambling to on the supposition that at best, the United States is no longer a reliable ally in these kinds of conflicts, and at worst, it is basically on the side of the Russians.
So in light of all that very good context that Andrew put on the table there, Chantal, what does a country like Canada do? What do NATO allies do when this seems to be upending what our understanding of the United States was or is?
So one, on Ukraine, we do not have the lead. France, Germany, the UK will have that lead. Second, silver lining here, Canada felt lonely being attacked by Donald Trump. Now he has managed to make just about every former ally of the United States figure this guy, under this guy, the U.S. is not our friend. And so new alliances, new developments, things that we have not seen in our lifetimes will come out of this. But the notion that the United States can decide the fate of Ukraine without European or Ukraine's presence, I think even from a Canada standpoint, I do not see a federal leader in this country backing that idea.
No. Althea, your thoughts?
Well, so much has changed just within a week. And to mention some of Andrew's points, it kind of sounds like the U.S. president is repeating Kremlin talking points. And so it's not just that Europeans are having to scramble, and I have to say that the French president has really kind of risen to the occasion. And we see the Europeans, not just the NATO countries, but EU countries, EU plus countries, Norway included in that, coming and recognizing that they need to fill a gap urgently. And Canada is part of those discussions, so that's a positive sign for us. But it's like the rules-based international order that Chrystia Freeland used to talk so much about when she was the Foreign Affairs Minister are under attack by the very country that basically set them up. And so we are having to think about what it means here. And I say, like, so much has changed within a week because Pierre Poilievre had a big speech just a few blocks away from where I'm sitting. And in it, one of the scenarios he painted was that we should move towards closer economic integration with the United States as a way to address the tariff threat. I'm not sure, following the Ukraine comments, that that is a sellable position anymore, even to conservatives. Like, the party of Ronald Reagan, the Republican Party, is not recognizable at all. And so many conservatives in this country who are Ronald Reagan's fans don't see themselves in the MAGA Trump party and don't see themselves in part of their own party as well. So I think we are having to think about what it means for not just our economic security, but our defense security, because we cannot trust our former allied partner.
Chantal, you wanted in?
What's interesting is that I know you may want to get back to that, but Stephen Harper wrote a letter today that actually said the last thing to do is to move towards further integration economically with the United States. So at some point, it was a letter that by and large sounded like what conservatives used to be like. And curiously, it did not seem to come in support of this notion of Mr. Poilievre that we should move towards further integration.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the next block. But Andrew, I do want to get back to Ukraine, because my colleague Evan Dyer wrote a piece comparing the language that President Trump uses about Canada to the language that President Putin uses about Ukraine. I don't know. I mean, that is something that immediately springs to mind, right? That if he's willing to let Putin run over Ukraine, what is he saying about this country?
Yeah, I do think we have to be fair to Mr. Poilievre, though, before we go on to that, which is that was he gave the United States two options, one of which was let's trade even more. I don't think there was any talk of a formal integration or anything like that, but just we'll trade even more. But his first option was he was talking in terms that sounded to me like he was putting on the table using our natural resources as a quote-unquote leverage. In other words, using it as a bargaining chip. So I think it was a broader discussion than just let's have a closer integration. And we can come back to whether that's any kind of useful idea. But no, look, all the alarm bells should be ringing. When you see the likes of Stephen Harper, when you see the likes of Lloyd Axworthy, talking as if we are not literally necessarily the next Ukraine in terms of military invasion, but certainly in a very bad place right now. The thing that used to be our great advantage and strength, that we had proximity to the largest superpower in the world and the largest consumer market in the world, that is no longer an advantage. It is now a liability. And one of the liabilities, certainly, I think we're going to have to discuss is what use is a free trade agreement with a country and administration that simply refuses to honor anything it signs? Are you simply at that point, does it simply become an entanglement? Does it simply become a lever for that country to use essentially economic blackmail on you? We always want to be free traders. We always want to be in our own interests. We want to be as open to foreign competition as we possibly can with every country that we possibly can. But formal free trade agreements with this kind of administration, I mean, where you're making concessions in return for them making concessions, well, you can't count on their concessions ever actually amounting to anything. So we've got to be looking extremely seriously, even at just the economic level. But let's not kid ourselves. If the United States and Russia are now essentially on the same side, we are wedged in between them with the very attractive prize of the North, the Arctic, in between us. You know, I'm not worried at this point about anybody invading Toronto. I'm extremely worried about the United States, Russia, China, any of these powers setting up shop in the North, essentially just thumbing their noses at our sovereignty, extracting resources and what have you.
Quick 30 seconds, because I saw Althea shake her nod in agreement, and then we'll leave it there.
Well, we just don't have the capacity to defend the land that we claim as our own, right? And so we are having to think through a kind of sci-fi scenario about what uncoupling means, not just economically to the free trade deals that Andrew's talking about, CUSMA, but also about all aspects of the way that we participate, whether that's NORAD, whether it's the health of the Great Lakes. Like, what does it mean if you cannot trust any of the information or your partner that you have built a relationship over 100+ years? Like, I think that is the planning scenario, because you don't know what's going to happen next week or next month, and you have to prepare for that.
Okay, quickly, Chantal, then I got to take a break.
But that also takes into account the assumption that this is where the U.S. will want to go over the next 4 years. I'm not convinced that you can carry public opinion. Has anyone asked the U.S. if they want us, like Americans? I'm not convinced that they do.
Okay, we're gonna leave it there. When we come back, we're gonna talk about some of the stuff you guys alluded to there, and also the Liberal leadership race, leadership contenders getting ready for the debates next week. We'll talk about what they're pitching now as the right response to Trump, and how Pierre Poilievre is doing much the same. That's next. At issue, Liberal leadership. With the English and French debates approaching, leadership contenders are firming up their pitches as the best answer to Donald Trump, while the Conservatives are using the Trump threats to explain their approach.
You know, the media is now saying that I should change my entire platform because of the tariff threat. In fact, the Trump tariff threats have proven conservatives right on everything.
Here to break down the latest on the Liberal leadership race and how the parties are addressing the Trump tariff threat, Chantal, Andrew, and Althea. Chantal, I'll start with you. I mean, what's interesting is the way everyone is making everything they're doing about Donald Trump. And Pierre Poilievre, apparently they don't call it a pivot, what he did Saturday. I'm not sure it's a pivot. What did you make of where his speech got us in terms of his approach to Donald Trump?
I think it got the Conservative Party the clips it wanted for advertising, sure. And that the people in the room were a great backdrop for that. Whether it was a pivot or not, I don't think it made a significant impression. It came on the Saturday, in between two storms, no control from the Conservatives over that. But the long weekend in most provinces that actually extended to Quebec because of snow. And I saw no real effort to pitch any of that, except to spend the past week saying there was no pivot, nothing happened, move on, people. Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming that's the message, that nothing happened.
What do you make of that, Althea? Because everyone else, Mark Carney was here with me on Sunday talking about how he'd tackle Trump. Chrystia Freeland is putting forward lots of policy about how she would take things on.
Well, no one has said that Mr. Poilievre should abandon his entire platform. I don't think I've read anybody say that or heard anybody say that. But people have been talking about how he has pivoted or refocused his message, and you saw that with, the Canada First underneath the lectern just there, and having to retool the messages, some of which he's been repeating for 2 years, towards the new threat. Mm-hmm. And I just want to, he did talk about how the United States should be better served with would be no better served with anybody but us, to Andrew's point. But then he also floated this idea that we should integrate more. I just wanted to clarify that. Yep. I think what is most interesting is just the time spent attacking Mark Carney. Mm-hmm. Whether it was in the speech, whether it was in the press conference that he gave, I'm losing track of time, today or yesterday, the way he's trying to tie Mr. Carney as being like the economic steward of the Liberal government over the past 5 years, which is factually inaccurate. But they're throwing everything at it because clearly they are worried. Yeah. One thing I will stress is accurate is when Mr. Poilievre makes criticisms of Mr. Carney's economic plan, which was unveiled this week, where he says a lot of it is borrowed from Justin Trudeau. And he's right, it does sound like it is borrowed. The same suggestion that they're going to run deficits and they're going to invest more, they're going to catalyze private sector money to create larger projects. Well, Justin Trudeau ran on the same promises, and they didn't seem to have worked out the way he intended. So why does Mark Carney think it will be different for him? So I do think there are some factual things that Mr. Poilievre has laid on the table that have legs, and there are other things that he's just, I think, trying to throw spaghetti at the wall, trying to see what will stick.
Yeah, one of the things that they've used now is the word sneaky. That's what they now keep calling Mr. Mark Carney. He's sneaky. That's the adjective they're trying to attach to him. Andrew, your thoughts?
Well, back to the speech. The speech itself, I think on its own, was pretty good. It I think, struck, my reading of anyway, struck an appropriately defiant note against Mr. Trump. In particular, the phrase about the bear any burden, pay any price. Yeah. One of the things that Stephen Harper's earlier intervention has put on the table, which I think is really important for anybody leading Canada at this moment, is we're maybe limited in what we can do to the United States in retaliation, but what we can communicate is our own resolve and our own willingness to pay the price for our independence. And that's very important for all of our political leaders to be doing. And the rest of it, there were some swipes at the opposition, but Mr. Carney, but much less, frankly, than is the typical Poilievre speech. Most of it was pretty mainstream conservatism. It wasn't things about the World Economic Forum or Bitcoin. It was about strong defense, fiscal discipline, free markets, and free enterprise. Yeah. So if we were just judging from the speech, you would say, okay, that's a pivot, and that's where he's going. Except all around it, he's being careful now to cozy up to people like Rebel, the Rebel News organization, which is hardly anyone's definition of a mainstream conservative outlet. Even suggesting, I read in reports, even suggesting that he might be open to extending subsidies to them. I don't think any news organization or professed news organization should be getting subsidies, but certainly not the Rebel. So it's a very much a mixed bag. We will have to see what happens going forward. It would be in his interest, you would think, to be projecting a more mainstream image, a more prime ministerial aura, but his own calculation seems to be that he needs to keep the further fringes inside the tent.
Today, in a press conference, he did not take any questions from quote-unquote mainstream media. That was
he took a question from Radio-Canada.
Oh, from Radio-Canada.
And because no one was around from that
was there to ask
far-right media to ask questions in French.
That's right.
But
Okay,
no,
enough.
I don't think he's... that was my point about taking the speech from Saturday, which was meant and did fit the prime ministerial mold, and spending the rest of the time trying to diminish it. His own
That's
MPs, well, the one who speaks in Quebec, because the other ones have become ghosts, spent the week saying there was no pivot. Well, then why did you bother bringing all these people in the middle of storms after Valentine's Day to deliver an important speech if you're not going to say anything about it, except it was same old, same old? Mr. Carney.
Yes.
I find it very generous to describe what he unveiled, or did he really unveil anything in Scarborough, as an economic plan. I'm still waiting for a real economic plan, because that kind of didn't fit the profile.
No, it was more like a framework for what an economic plan will be when it comes. I would agree. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. That is at issue for tonight on The National, but we're going to continue our conversation as we do this week about the government's high-speed rail announcements. You can catch that on YouTube and on the podcast. Now back to Adrienne in Toronto.
All right, thanks, Rosie. Coming up, what do you do when a moose camps out on your doorstep?
I scared her. She scared the crap out of me. I jumped back. She jumped up.
A very rare early morning visitor and a day-long standoff. Next in our moment. When Chelsea Coles opened her door on Monday morning, she was expecting the shock of minus 30-degree cold weather. Instead, she felt a wave of warmth from a moose that had curled up in front of her door. So after the initial scare, she managed to shoo it away. But when she returned home from Pilates, there it was again. The nearly day-long standoff that ensued is our moment.
I was like, what is going on? Like, this is nuts. It was 8:30. I pulled my door open and I scared her. She scared the crap out of me. I jumped back. She jumped up. She was sliding all around like a Bambi trying to get away from me. I slammed the door, screamed. I could have touched her. I felt the warmth coming from her body when she jumped up. It was the most surreal. But anyway, I grabbed my shovel and kind of was shooing her away, and she went to the edge of my driveway finally, and I was able to get in my car, and I went to Pilates and then came home, and she was nuzzled up, laying down right back at my front door again. I could not get in my house for over an hour. I sat in my car. It was minus 30. It was so cold. So I took my extension cord and banged it on the side of my garage, and she did not like that at all. And she walked down past my driveway and kind of left, but she hung around probably for like 6-7 hours. She peed and ate some of my tree, and she was very happy here. Yeah, no, she was definitely really cute.
Cute, but possibly sulking because she hasn't seen her since. And maybe you're thinking, why didn't she just go out a back door? But apparently the way the house is configured, the other door would have put her just as close to the moose. So she was genuinely stuck, but she did have time to clean up all that poop that the moose left. From all of us at The National, thank you for being with us. You can watch anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app and subscribe to The National's YouTube channel. I'm Adrienne Arsenault. Take care.